Good evening. My name is Henry Vlacovsky, and my project is entitled A Secondary Analysis of Federal Datasets with an Emphasis on the Deep South in Alabama. My project director is Dr. Stephen Katsinas, who is the director of the Education Policy Center here at the University of Alabama. To give a brief overview of my presentation, I'm going to start by giving a background on Pell Grants and how they were founded. I'm then going to look at some of the impact of Pell Grants in the state of Alabama before looking more at some of the previous research that's been done by the Education Policy Center on Pell Grants. I will then take a look at the current work that we're doing on Pell Grants in Alabama and some of the changes that have been made to the program over the past few years before briefly touching on some of the future points of research. So to start, Pell Grants were founded as the Basic Educational Opportunity Grant Program in 1972 as part of the Education Amendments to the Higher Education Act of 1972. The Pell Grant Program is the largest federal student grant aid program in the country, which is founded as a bipartisan product of a goal trying to provide access for low-income students to access higher education for 4-credit degrees and certificates. The Pell Grant program is need-based, so it is awarded based on need as well as the number of semesters a student is taking and their full-time or part-time credit, which is calculated using the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid form. In 2012, there were 3 major restrictions implemented on the Pell Grant program, namely the lowering in lifetime eligibility from 18 to 12 semesters, the lowering of the expected family contribution maximum household income from $32,000 to $23,000, and lastly, the removal of the ability to benefit, which essentially means that you must have a GED or a high school diploma or equivalent to benefit from the Pell Grant program. Taking a look at the national impact of Pell Grant by some large numbers, in the 2021-2022 year, the Pell Grant program dispersed $25.9 billion in grant funding. Now this is $10 billion down from 2012, but still a quite significant number. About 1 in every 3 undergraduate students in the United States are part of the Pell Grant program, about 32%, and the Pell Grant program makes up the vast majority of the federal student grant aid in the country at 71%. 6.1 million undergraduate students benefit from the Pell Grant program every year. Looking more in depth at the Pell Grant program's significance in the state of Alabama, if you take a look at the chart on the left, this compares the average Pell Grant award in the state of Alabama to the average Alabama State Grant Aid Award for students in Alabama. As you can see, the Alabama State Grant Award is below $300, whereas the average award for the Pell Grant is just below $5,000. This significant difference means that effectively the Pell Grant in Alabama is the de facto state student aid for students in Alabama. If you look at the chart on the right, you can see, to put these numbers into context, Alabama gives just over 3% of their educational allotments towards public financial aid. The national average sits just below 10%. So both on a rate basis and on a raw monetary basis, Alabama sits below the national average, and therefore Pell Grants are that much more important to the state and the low-income students that live here. So looking at past Pell Grant research by the EPC, to provide some context, from 2008 to 2011, Pell Grant funding almost doubled. In this time, we saw drastic increases in enrollment, especially in Alabama, where the Pell Grant program is so important. This chart compares looking at headcount enrollment as a Pell as a percentage of headcount enrollment versus Pell as a percentage of full-time equivalent enrollment. As we can see, the funding catalyzed extreme enrollment growth for both headcount and full-time equivalent. Notably, because full-time equivalent grows faster here, this means that not only did the funding increase the number of students on Pell, but also the number of credits that those students on Pell took. Now looking after the 2012, when the restrictions were implemented, we see a survey of Alabama financial aid administrators and their thoughts on the 3 different restrictions. Looking at both the lowering of the expected family contribution and the lowering of the lifetime eligibility, we see negative impact across the board for 4-year and 2-year institutions. From both survey results and thousands of Alabama students that were impacted, somehow losing Pell funding or losing eligibility. Looking at the ability to benefit, this now comes into play when it affects students attending programs in 2-year schools like welding or other specialized trades where you may not traditionally need a GED or a diploma, but now can no longer benefit from the Pell Grant program. And so where these programs are offered, we saw a massive negative benefit or a massive negative decrease in enrollment. Looking at the significance of our current research, first, to relook over the results of the 2012 Pell Grant study that was done by the EPC to understand, because the study was released so quickly after the restrictions were implemented, looking at the long-term effects. We know that enrollment decreased, but understanding a little bit more in depth about how that happened. And then second, looking at the Summer Pell impact that was re-implemented in 2017. Summer Pell allows students to draw down 150% of their maximum Pell award, and it aligns more closely with how classes are typically done, where classes may be taken over the summer, leases are 12 months, and this allows students to take classes in that timeline and graduate more quickly and go into the workforce, which is ultimately the goal of the Pell program. Taking a look at some of the current research, we see here a revision of the previous graph comparing the Pell as a percentage of unduplicated headcount versus full-time enrollment. As you can see in the previous chart, though this is slightly more generalized, the increase in unduplicated headcount and full-time equivalent increased dramatically leading up to 2012, but quickly dropped off after that, with, and again, notably, the full-time equivalent dropping off more quickly than unduplicated, meaning that fewer students were enrolling in Pell and fewer students were taking fewer hours. Now, the critical thing here to notice is the 2017-2018 impact of Summer Pell. Because students had access to the Summer Pell, we see a pretty dramatic flattening out of this decrease, and that we can't understand the full effects now with COVID and other factors that have kind of muddled the data. Ultimately, it is clear that at least Summer Pell made some sort of very clear positive impact on this decreasing enrollment and decreasing of hours by Alabama students. Looking next at some more generalized research surrounding Pell enrollment at public versus private for-profit versus private not-for-profit, we can see, again, a dramatic increase leading up to the 2012 deficits as the Pell funding was increased, and then as the restrictions were implemented by Congress in 2012, we see a dramatic fall-off in percentage of students on Pell, and again, seems to be a flattening of Pell going forward after the 2017 summer, which is critical for what we're looking going forward. So future research, what we're trying to do is look at the effect of private schools and how they draw down Pell dollars, because some of the forms of aid private school students don't have access to, which is critical to understand, as well as looking at the full impact of 2017 and the Summer Pell. If we look at the data, what we do see is a flattening, but there needs to be much stronger correlations drawn with the data, understanding how providing people the ability to have summer funding affects their choice to stay enrolled and to take more or fewer hours. In addition, we hope to draw a better landscape of the state of Alabama higher education aid since the 2012 study has been conducted, to understand where these schools lie, how students are making decisions, and what the best way is to incentivize students enrolling and graduating at higher rates. This research is very important. It has been presented at the White House multiple times, in front of Congress multiple times, and in front of Senator Shelby's committee for distribution of funds. So this is very important, and we hope that we can make an impact on policy going forward. These are my sources. And then, any questions?
So in slide 11, you mentioned about your landscape report. I'm wondering if related to that, back now, I think it's around slide 5, you mentioned this disparity of 3% support in Alabama versus around 10% of supportive aid nationally. Can you say a little bit more about why is that the financial aid situation in Alabama is so different compared to the national average?
Sure. So Alabama has selected time over time to not fund its public education. It also deals with a great disparity in different counties. The Black Belt is a historically impoverished, poor county, unfortunately, and so by providing access to them, which the counties you don't see in other states, it's critical to focus on that. In addition to that, like I said, because Alabama focuses on putting their money towards other things and doesn't fund their public education, Pell Grants become that much more vital for the state and the students that live here.
Why do you think the reintroduction of Summer Pell program has made a positive impact if it only serves to provide an opportunity to accelerate one's education?
So the Summer Pell program was very extremely important, and the reason for this is somewhat convoluted. It's not because they get more summer hours, because the lifetime eligibility still applies, and so the more credit hours in a year and the more semesters you take, the more quickly you graduate. But that's the key, is that for a lot of these students that are on Pell, time is just as valuable as the Pell Grants, and so allowing them to accelerate their education and take more hours and more quickly allows them to get degrees and earn money and get into the workforce more quickly.
So you've shown me evidence that the restrictions on the Pell Grant have impacted one margin, which is the head counts, right? There's fewer students maybe enrolling. Do you have a sense of another margin being like student outcomes, right? Like the restriction didn't take me out of school. I'm still being educated, but now I've maybe had to take up a job, and so my grades are maybe lower. Do you have a sense of how students are performing after the restrictions?
So that is part. It's a good question. That's part of what we're going to look for going forward, is understanding how being able to accelerate your education makes a difference, as well as how these restrictions made a difference. The thought is that by being able to complete your education faster, you hopefully don't have to take a job, but we haven't looked fully into the studies yet, and so we don't understand quite the full picture.
Can you touch on why the ability to benefit restriction is so significant in the state of Alabama?
So Alabama has a very large manufacturing arm and a lot of people that are involved in skilled trades, and so it's very important that we are able to send workers to these kind of jobs. And when ability to benefit takes away these kind of jobs, or takes away from people that may be able to earn degrees through the Pell program or certificates or whatever through the Pell program, but are not able to do so because they can't get funding, now people that don't have a high school degree are further put in a hole.